Hey guys, it's Matt here, and today I'm bringing you another episode of Matt Rants. So, this episode actually got pushed back because of the Matt Rants that I did just yesterday on the channel, so definitely check that out if you would like to. It's actually about Nintendo cloud saves and how fun those are. Anyways, some of you first-time listeners might not know, you can tell from the title of the video and from the thumbnail that we're talking about the Polymega, but you don't know that we usually bring up different questions and things like that surrounding different topics for Matt Rants. So today's question is the Polymega a scam? And this is a very interesting one, and the reason why is because I don't know where to lean. I'll tell you guys where I lean at the end of the video, but let's talk about a few things here and there. So you might not know what the Polymega is. Before getting into any specs or anything like that, the Polymega is the system to end all systems. No, the Polymega is not like a Retron. Technically, it's not supposed to be like a Retron. Technically, it's not supposed to be like a, the Retro Freak consoles, like the 12, or I think it was like a 12-in-1 or 13-in-1 for the Retro Freak console. And for, Retron 5s, that's a 5-in-1 right there. And if you don't know what those are essentially clone consoles. You can play 5 different consoles for the Retron 5. A Retron 3 has 3 different consoles. Retron 3 has the NES, Super NES, and the Genesis. Retron 5 has SNES, NES, Genesis, Game Boy Color. I don't know if they count Game Boy Advance in the color as well. I don't know if they're counting both of those as 4 and 5. Also, you can play not just NES, but also Famicom and Super Famicom and Mega Drive as well on those. So when it comes to the Retro Freak, I mean, it gets crazy. You can play like the PC Engine and, oh god, what is it? There's a few other ones as well for the Retro Freak console. It's crazy how many different variations they have for that system. I think you'd even play Famicom Disk System, but not too sure about that. However, when it comes to the Polymega, it's very interesting because it is CD based, just like CD, SEEDI, which was something that a company, I forgot their name, tried to get. It was 2 guys actually, so I shouldn't say a company, but 2 guys tried to get funded. That was a CD based emulation kind of console thing. And it wasn't like a new thing. It wasn't like the oh god, what was it? The Atari VCS is the console that I was thinking of, and funnily enough, there aren't any real comparisons hardware-software-wise to the Atari VCS with the Polymega, but there are some other comparisons I'll be making later on during the Matt Rants. So, I brought it up, though, because it is not like that. It's a bit more like the CD. The difference, though, with, at least seemingly at first, the difference between something like CD and something like the Polymega is that CD, you had to have the BIOS for certain consoles to be able to play them. So, to play a PS1 game, you had to have the PS1 BIOS. Technically, that's illegal. So that was an issue right there, is that they weren't necessarily making new emulators or things like that, or they weren't actually bringing in hardware necessarily that mimics the original hardware. It was just, hey, we're loading up some emulators on this thing. It's CD based, which is nice, but we're just loading up some emulators, and it didn't even play, there were a lot of incompatibility issues with the CD. And again, SEEDI. When it comes to the Polymega, however, it is CD based right off the bat. So you are paying $300, but the base system itself allows you to play PS1. I'm imagining PS2, but it has been confirmed, at least by the dev team, that Sega Saturn and, Sega CD, that stuff will be compatible with the system. Now, you also have these other retro modules, things like that, these add-ons that you can also purchase as well, and those allow you to play as not just SNES games and NES games and stuff like that, but you actually play the physical cartridges from your collection. So that's pretty cool. So if you don't know what that is the Polymega in a nutshell. Why could it potentially be a scam? Well, here are a few issues, and a few issues that have come up as of late because they finally put up their Kickstarter type method. It's not technically a Kickstarter, but it's a Kickstarter type method to try to crowdfund to get these, to get these things to you guys. But there are a few issues like I just mentioned, so let's talk about them right now. The first one is that the specs have changed. So originally, they talked about this being an FPGA console. Now, what does that mean? Well, I'm not going to get too into it because getting too into it even confuses me, but in layman terms, the difference between saying the words emulation and FPGA is that emulation is software emulation. So that's when you load up, an emulator on your computer, on your tablet, on your mobile phone, wherever you load up your emulators, and then you're trying to play your games through there. So that's emulation in a nutshell, if you didn't know. FPGA, now that's hardware emulation. So the reason why that's somewhat different is because there are a lot of games that cannot be played with software emulation versus hardware emulation. Also, hardware emulation can be considered a bit more reliable and also isn't using certain software that have certain user agreements and certain licenses that don't allow you to use them on a console. So that's actually how the creators of the Retron 5 got into a little bit of hot water, because they were caught using not just software emulation, because that's not necessarily a problem in and of itself, but they were using emulators that exist online that in their user agreements say, hey, don't use this. And then when certain certain emulation creators and devs were talked to, they were like, hey, we didn't necessarily give them the license to use this, which is a little bit frustrating because they had to reverse engineer everything. It's not like the like needing to use the PlayStation BIOS or something like that, that you could arguably, if you paid them the license to use it, you could use one of their Super Nintendo emulators and have no problem from Nintendo in using it. Obviously, you could have other legal issues in terms of trademarking and the names and stuff like that. But if the code is 100% theirs, then it's 100% theirs. It's just emulation. So now we know that the Polymega is not FPGA, it's actually emulation / FPGA. So it's kind of a hybrid kind of console, which if some people have already given money to this, some people have already backed this in some way or another, because I believe there was a Kickstarter before this one, it is a little bit frustrating because you've been giving money to this. You assumed, that they were going to give you the FPGA because that's what they said in the beginning, and now all of a sudden things have changed. And that does make some people kind of feel like it's just a glorified Retron 5. And also, again, that inconsistency, even though that is subject to change with any kind of Kickstarter or any kind of crowdfunding campaign, it is still frustrating to feel like you were either lied to or deceived in some way or another. Now, number 2 is where I think things start to really go awry. Because with the first one, I understand where you guys are coming from if you guys are upset, but I'm not a big specs guy, and maybe that's just on me. You can definitely sound off about that in the comment section down below, but I think that number 2 is where things get a little bit heavy. So with number 2, apparently in the trailer, so there was a trailer and you guys can see it. I'll actually post it in the description box down below. There was a trailer for this and it had a bunch of different footage from a bunch of different games on there. And one of the games was actually a Sega Saturn game. So that made you think, oh man, from the get-go, you can put in Sega Saturn games. You don't even have to buy any of the modules because, again, like I mentioned earlier, the base system is CD based. So apparently they have really good Sega Saturn emulation. I mean, they had Rally Racer footage on there, which I'm not saying is necessarily a taxing game. I'm not sure if it is or if it's not, but still they had it in passing there. So that was pretty cool. That's the first thing you think, like, oh wow, it's pretty cool. Except people who are much more knowledgeable about Rally Racer than me, and probably the Sega Saturn library in general, noticed that it was not Sega Saturn footage. It was the Rally Racer game, yes, which is a Sega Saturn game, but it's also an arcade game. So it was actually the arcade footage, but it was listed as Sega Saturn footage. That's a huge problem. Especially, and I'll get to that a little bit later, their reaction to it, they being Polymega's reaction to that, and their PR team in general. So, but before we even get to that, just the idea that the footage was not, it was arcade footage, it was main footage, and it wasn't Sega Saturn footage. Even if that was just a complete error on their part, and this thing has perfect, and I mean immaculate, this thing has amazing Sega Saturn emulation, better than the PC ones out there. Let's just pretend. I'm just pretending hypothetical. This is still a huge issue to say, hey, you have to pay $300 off the bat for this. And by the way, we put the wrong, footage up. And also another thing too, and some other YouTubers have actually been talking about this and been saying this, it's been a while, like I'm even late to the party talking about this news, yet I haven't heard the Polymega team put up another video with them playing Sega Saturn footage. I mean, it's YouTube, it's 2018. If there's a problem like this, you can just get a team together. Heck, you can do the low budget, all right, let's just get the camera up to the, to the television. I know it's not fancy, it's not amazing, it doesn't look spectacular, there's no bells and whistles, but if there's a problem with, that kind of footage, and it's been addressed, and they have addressed it a bunch of different times now, now, why would you not either re-upload a video? Why would you not change something up? It's not like you're licensing yes, you have stockholders to appease and things like that. Maybe you don't want to, show off to them that you messed up, but the internet's talking about this, and it's not like there's any kind of licensing agreements. Like when it comes to anime streaming services, you guys might not know this, but when it comes to anime streaming services, if they mess up a line, like in the opening or something like that, any issues that they mess up or that things might need to get changed and addressed, they actually have to go to the Japanese publishers and be like, hey, can we change this? Even though it's the English side of things that's doing the translation and doing the dubs and the subtitling and everything like that. If there's any kind of little issues that need to be addressed, they need to go up to the higher ups from the Japanese side of things that they've licensed the show from. And sometimes, even though they might be some issues, little bits here and there, they aren't glaring enough that it would not look petty if they went to the Japanese side of things and were like, hey, here's a list of things. Also, it makes them look bad. Like, here's a list of things that we screwed up. Can we change them? So when it comes to this, though, it's not that they don't have those people to be beholden to. So it's kind of odd that they wouldn't just re-release more footage or re-release the same footage and have it be Sega Saturn footage. That makes it seem like they can't emulate Sega Saturn games, which if that's the case, then any promotion of them doing such is clearly fraudulent. So even if you're going to say that the entire Polymega isn't a scam, it still leaves you wondering. And that's not a good thing to have happen, especially with a console that is so expensive like this one, especially $300. And before, I'm not going to get to the PR stuff just yet. I actually want to get one more little thing in here. It's not on my notes, but I want to extrapolate a little bit more on the Sega Saturn thing too. Speaking of, so I don't know much about the Sega Saturn market. I do have a Sega Saturn. I do have a few games for it. I don't have any, high ticket, really expensive games because I don't have that kind of money. So here's the thing. Let's pretend that I've bought the Polymega, right? Let's just pretend I bought the Polymega, have it, and I want to play Sega Saturn games on it. From what I can tell online, most of the time, it's Sega Saturn games that are expensive due to limited supply, not the Sega Saturns themselves. Yes, Sega Saturn did not really do well in America, but it's not the Sega Saturns that are going up for, like $300 or anything in that range. It's certain Sega Saturn games. And you can't necessarily emulate or put in bootlegs into the Polymega as far as we know as of right now. And I'm not saying that the Polymega should promote that you can do that or should have that easily available, because of course that would then get, Sega, Nintendo, Sony, a bunch of other companies on their ass. So I completely understand why they, are not promoting that in any way. But what I'm trying to get at here, though, guys, is I feel as if you are a Sega Saturn collector out there, tell me what you think in the comment section down below. Tell me if I'm about to be wrong with what I'm about to say. But I feel like if you're going to get the game, you're probably going to want to play it on the original hardware anyway. And the original hardware, unless you want it in pristine condition, in box with its original controller and a bunch of other, things here and there, it's probably not going to be as expensive as the Polymega. So, and yes, the Polymega can do a bunch of other things as well, but even when jumping to other, things as well, CD-based, the PS1, it's kind of cheap to get a PS1 now. And if you think, well, a PS1 isn't HDMI based, okay, but you can get a PS2 with cheap component cables and then also play PS1 games. Now, you could say, well, PS2s aren't as cheap as you might think, Matt. Okay, that's fair. But even then, are they $300 or are they $100? And again, if you want to get one in pristine condition, maybe modded or something like that, a few other, bells and whistles, yeah, of course it'll be pretty expensive, but is it really $100? And that's the thing I think we have to ask ourselves here is when we break down what someone might actually want to use this for, does it justify, even with the base unit, getting it for, PS1, PS2, even something like Sega CD? I would argue Sega CD actually could be considered a bit more expensive because you do end up getting this Genesis and you want to make sure the CD, the laser's working. So I will admit, when it comes to some Sega stuff that isn't Saturn based, okay, that works. Also, my Dreamcast isn't working too well. It seems like it's not even last legs. I think it's just the AV cable, the AV port is just completely busted. So being able to play Dreamcast on this thing actually would be pretty nice. So I'll admit, when it comes to Dreamcast, when it comes to the Sega CD, okay. But for the Saturn specifically, I don't know. Again, tell me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not looking at this right, but I feel like in general, it seems as if the consoles are not as expensive when combined, at least for the base unit, compared to the price of the Polymega. And if the emulation isn't perfect for some of these games, and I know emulation will never be completely perfect, FGPA will actually be pretty close, but even then, there's going to be a hybrid emulation FPGA, so I get that it won't be perfect, but at the same time, I just feel as if you have, a small collection of Saturn games and you end up finding out that none of them work, it feels like you just wasted $300 versus having to buy a Saturn unit secondhand in, beat up condition, but it still actually plays the games. Yes, when it comes to the save data, if the Polymega will most likely be better in that department, I kind of get where, you'd be worried about your save data being erased on your Sega Saturn because that happens a fair amount more than you'd like. Which is sad, but it does happen. So I do understand it from that perspective, but just from playing the games, it's kind of like, well, my save data gets erased on my original Saturn, but I can't play any of my Saturn games on the Polymega, potentially, so that does become an issue in the future. Now, moving on to the PR team, because you might be thinking, Matt, you know what? Some of these things could potentially be an issue. Some of those things could potentially not be an issue. The PR team, even if they can't say outright, oh, don't worry about this, don't worry about that, you would think that they'd be somewhat supportive, not of assholes, not of people who are setting out like death threats or things like that. Sure, shut those people down immediately. Anyone who's being belligerent and clearly a piece of shit, you can shut them down, in my opinion. You can. However, though, just people asking certain questions, their PR team, for some reason, is kind of taking a page out of the Atari VCS PR team book. It's just very strange because with people, so some people are asking questions and multiple questions over and over and over, sure. But, like the whole, oh, have you addressed the issue with the Sega Saturn and the, the Rally Racer footage, things like that. And instead of them going, yes, we have, it is actually located right here. And granted, it's in text, but still, instead of them writing that, they'll go, yeah, we already answered that question, so you probably should have looked harder. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, you're trying to sell a product that is literally more than... Because if you're selling a product that's $20, if you're selling a product that is literally $20, maybe $30, you shouldn't be jerks to anyone that you're selling it to, but at least it's small enough, or at least the price is low enough that I'm like... You guys suck, but it's a cheap product. It's a cheap product. You're trying to sell a $300 system. Other than what I've already mentioned, the death threats, anything that's like, cursing, swearing, anything like that from your fan base, you be nice. You be polite. Another thing, too, that they did, you would think that that's, maybe you would think that isn't bad. You're like, Matt, whatever, who cares? They called you guys snobs. Now, when I say you guys, I say you guys... Because if any of you out there were like, oh, that PR thing, who cares about that? But I do care about good hardware emulation. I care about these things being able to play my games. They called you snobs. They were saying that people who care about this authenticity are quote-unquote snobs. They used snobs. Not even kidding. Articles will be posted in the description box down below. So, and you could say, Matt, but you also want that, aren't you a snob? Apparently I am. They've roped me into this, and now I feel like it's personal. I'm kidding, but still, though, it is that's a joke. But it still is frustrating because it's like, who runs your PR team? That's the thing. Like, it's even if this thing has perfect Saturn emulation, there are people right now that are like, oh, so I'm a snob now, am I? Well, I guess I'm not going to buy your system because I already have my Sega Saturn. Because unless you're a really diehard Sega Saturn collector, but you don't want a Sega Saturn, I can't imagine someone buying a bunch of Sega Saturn games and not having a Sega Saturn to play them on, unless, of course, their Sega Saturn, died or something like that. But unless there's something really emotionally, attached, like some kind of memory or something like that to the Sega Saturn games and the Sega Saturn library, I can't imagine you buying those without the console. So that, like I mentioned earlier, you probably have a Sega Saturn already. So when a company that is selling a product that isn't necessarily a necessity at this point has a PR team or has a damage control team, and technically not a PR, you could argue their social media team, so I've probably been using the term wrong, PR, but they're giving them bad PR, I'll say that much. A social media team that's just like, how about we shit on our consumer general, our general consumer base. It's like, who is running that operation? At least the social media side that's like, you know what, that's a good idea. Call them snobs. What? What are you doing? Do you not know how this community works? Even something that's a perceived slight but not a big deal, insert whatever controversy you want to here, is still looked at as if it's the end of the world that we know it. I would probably get copyright claimed just for saying that. But that's what it's looked at. Even any minor inconvenience to some is someone else's biggest scandal of the day when it comes to video games, be it retro or be it newer ones. And you're actually going to call them snobs, and you think that the limited amount of people, again, remember that too, because it's not like this is playing PS4 games here or Nintendo Switch games. Heck, you have to buy other modules that are like $60 or like $100 just to play certain cartridge-based games, and you have to get them separately. So you have to get like your N64 one separate from your, kind of like the Retroad, but at least with a Retroad, you can use that with your computer, which can definitely run those things easily. But we don't know anything about the Polymega yet. This is a brand new company, from the looks of it, coming out of nowhere, and it's just like, why are you doing this, you fools? To me, I feel as if the social media stuff is actually worse than faking the footage, allegedly, or at the very least having that mistake with the footage. Because even if you believe them, even if it was a mistake and they were like, damn it, we really screwed that up, that sucks, and we give them the benefit of the doubt, even though we don't have a new footage actually showing off what the console can do with Sega Saturn games, even if we give them the benefit of the doubt, to have a social media team that's replying to people's questions with, y'all are snobs. That's paraphrasing, but y'all are snobs. And just saying, yeah, we answered your question already. And just throwing up a link like, I guess you haven't been, I guess you weren't reading right or something along those lines. It's just like, what are you, like, I'm just flabbergasted because I'm sitting here and I'm like, that your product isn't going to, like, millions and millions of people aren't going to buy those products. Now, I don't know how many Retron 5s have sold. Again, maybe they have, they're privy to numbers that I'm not privy to because I haven't seen Retron 5 sales. I don't know where those can be located. If you guys know, please tell me down below because I would love to take a look at those. And it's just a thing where it's just crazy that even though, yes, this one does have all the CD stuff available in the base, allegedly, and it all works just fine, allegedly, it's still cray to me that this would be their response and think our product is so good that people are going to love us even while we shit on them. It's just like, no, you misunderstand the market completely. Again, maybe, I don't have the math in front of me. I'm not going to look up, because even if I did look up every console in front of me that could potentially be included not only in the base but also with the modules on the side, it still is something that changes, on a daily basis. So if I can show you a price charting thing today, it'll be different, a month from now, even a week from now. So I don't want to get into all those numbers right this second, but even if they're more expensive altogether, buying the consoles, not just the games, because we're assuming you already have the games in your collection, but buying the consoles compared to a $300 Polymega, people are going to spend the money on those consoles if you're calling them snobs. And to those that don't have anything, let's say they don't have any consoles, don't have any games, then I'm not saying they're not going to get into buying physical media. They totally can. But the $300 price point is definitely going to be a deterrent. So this is for a certain kind of, not necessarily a collector, but a certain kind of clientele that has that kind of money to burn. And let me explain, guys. Let me really just put this out there, just right out there. So I don't have a Nintendo Switch. Right? I don't. You guys know this if you listen to other Matt Rants, but maybe if you don't, cue the shocking music, dun dun dun. I don't have a Nintendo Switch, but I want one, especially with the games that are coming out. Oh, damn. I talked about them in the recent Nintendo Direct rant that I did, the Matt Rant that I did. Oh, damn. So I want a Nintendo Switch. I've wanted one for a while. Why am I not going to go for a Nintendo Switch versus going for the Polymega? Even though, yes, I have a bunch of the consoles that are, on the Polymega, and yes, Saturn games aren't really available on the Switch, and a bunch of other consoles as well. But why would I go for $300 in that direction versus $300 towards a brand new console like the Nintendo Switch? When the price ends up being that high just for the base unit, I know what it can do versus a Switch. Don't get me wrong, not trying to come off as like Nintendo's the best. Because if you saw my cloud saves, Matt Rants, I was not necessarily leaning in that direction. But my whole thing is just like, you have to look at how much you're selling a product for. You have to see how many people might be interested in something like this. And then you have to think, do we even have the right to be assholes? And when you're in the $300 range, you're saying yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, and yes, person to a bunch of different people, unless, again, they're being, they're threatening you. And I've said that over and over, but I really want to make that clear. I'm not going to let threats and things like that slide. But if people are just asking you general questions and you're getting annoyed, guess what? Welcome to your fucking job description. It's just that simple. It is just that simple. So, as we're gonna wrap this up right now, do I think that the Polymega is a scam? I don't, actually. But I do think that this company is shooting itself in the foot. I definitely think that they do, and I definitely think that alongside the price tag, but frankly, mostly they're shooting themselves in the foot via their PR team. I think that's going to affect sales. I really do. I think that that's going to affect sales. The misstep that they took with the footage is going to affect sales. And in general, I just don't think that I just think that there's just a bunch of different miscalculations and missteps that they've done that are really going to hurt this product's sales, at least as a pre-order. Maybe afterwards, hey, if I have an extra $300 to burn once the console is actually out, then yeah, okay, I'd want to maybe check it out, sure, especially on the secondhand market. But to pre-order this system, it doesn't sit well with me. So do I think it's a scam? No. I think it's going to come out, and I think it's going to work, but I don't think it's going to work in any, I bet you money, and I hate to say this, unless they develop whatever Saturn emulator they're working with, or they're working with the one that's on the market and they're tweaking that, or I say on the market as if it's being sold. It's not. It's free. I forgot what the name of it is, but there's a free one that's good from what I hear. But still, if that's the one that they're using, then it's not going to be 100% compatible, of course. And I do wonder if this rally racer footage won't actually work. Wouldn't that be a kick in the pants? Also, another thing that they did as well, and I don't know if this leads to it being a scam or not, but it's definitely scummy regardless. Apparently, well, first of all, the console is apparently coming out on April 1st, which is like flag. But all jokes aside, right? All jokes aside, that wasn't what was that? That wasn't even cops. That sounded kind of like an ambulance. I don't know, that was weird. That was a weird sound that I made. But the point is that apparently April 1st is actually the last day that you can do a chargeback. I'm sorry, well, March 31st, I believe. Last day you could do a chargeback. So April 1st, the fact that they chose that being the day where the campaign's over, everything's done with that, and they're going to be sent out, apparently you can't do a chargeback with your card. So that's kind of, interesting. Again, just leaning me towards not necessarily a scam, but they do want to get their money. And I feel like if things go south, I can speak well. If they go south, they might be like, well, we got our money, take care. I'm worried about it. Now, again, do I think that they're actually going to do that? I don't. It's just one of those things that's kind of like, ooh, this is just, suspect. It's a little suspicious, and you should definitely keep it in mind. But again, do I think the Polymega is a scam? No, I really don't. It's just there's a few different things, like I just said earlier, that I'm like, I'm not going to pre-order it myself. But hey, maybe you are. Maybe you enjoy the product, even though you don't have it yet. But maybe you want to enjoy it. Either way, guys, I want to hear what all of you think in the comment section down below. Because personally, I actually want this to succeed. It might seem like I don't want it to succeed because of everything I brought up, in this Matt Rants. But honestly, I really feel bad about the whole PR stuff and everything like that on social media, because I really do think it's going to take a chunk out of the system and even, out of its sales. And even if this thing is perfect, it's not going to do well. But again, maybe you disagree. Maybe you disagree with everything I've said. Maybe you've already pre-ordered it. Maybe you're super duper hyped. I want to hear whatever you have to say. Whether you agree, whether you disagree, I don't care what it is, as long as it's respectful. Would love to hear about it in the comment section down below. Thank you all so much. Love you all. Take care, and tune in next time for another episode of Matt Rants. All right, guys, so see ya.